Allen Company, 47 years young and a proud sponsor, wishes OOIDA all the best as you celebrate 50 years.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
An OOIDA Life member who recently won a Company Driver of the Year award didn't just get a trophy and a pat on the back. Dave Sweetman got the carpet rolled out for him over a weekend of experiences in Winston Salem, North Carolina. And if you know anything about Winston Salem, especially in the spring and summer, you might know what Sweetman's weekend consisted of. What is the importance of secondary liability? Landline Now's Ashley Blackford speaks with Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department about why it's needed, what it covers, and the questions you need to ask your agent. And finally, the final week of June was a solid week for anyone who hauls freight on the spot market. Ashley has the latest details on the market from Robert Rouse of DAT, along with what truckers can expect in the weeks ahead. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. Another proposed mandate is hitting the Federal Register tomorrow. It's related to automatic emergency braking systems on heavy vehicles. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration are considering a requirement on new vehicles that weigh more than 10,000 pounds. The agencies claim the proposal would prevent nearly 20,000 crashes and more than 150 deaths each year. While truck safety groups have praised the proposal, others like OOIDA have concerns.
We are always going to have concerns about regulatory mandates for technologies or any other ruling that hasn't been proven to benefit highway safety.
That's Jay Grimes, OOIDA Director of Federal Affairs. The association and other opponents contend that automatic emergency braking, or AEB technology, as a whole has not been perfected. Grimes says OOIDA has heard concerns from drivers about false activation, taking control out of a driver's hands, and not being able to work properly in all weather and road conditions, and that's just the start.
A lot of these technologies, the drivers can't perform their own maintenance. So that's the cost side is certainly going to be one aspect of our concern, but reliability is another major concern. And I've had drivers who've been on the road for decades, have millions of miles of safe driving experience without this AEB technology. And then we hear from drivers who have all that experience, they're driving a truck with this AEB, and they really have a sense that it's taking away from their ability to drive safely. And these false activations just keep coming down the pipe.
All of this comes amid investigations and recalls related to automatic emergency braking technology. Just about a month ago, NHTSA itself opened a probe into false automatic braking on certain Freightliner and Western Star trucks following complaints. But the rulemaking is moving forward regardless, partly because it's mandated by law. Once it hits the Federal Register on Thursday, the public will have 60 days to comment, and Grimes hopes drivers weigh in.
If you like it, great. If you don't, if you feel like there's been some real safety issues, if you've used it, make sure that NHTSA hears about that. Because, unfortunately, NHTSA is required to go through this rulemaking process. But there are a lot of steps that we think they can take to make sure that whenever it's finalized, that it's really going to be as safe as possible for motor carriers and drivers. And we're at that critical phase where that feedback is going to be especially important.
For more information, keep an eye on the fightingfortruckers.com website. Time now for our weekly check on average diesel prices nationwide. They're down again week over week. First, the Energy Information Administration's data shows that prices dipped another 3 cents last week to $3.76 a gallon. That's the lowest they've been on the EIA report since January of 2022. Prices fell in 9 of the 10 regions the agency tracks, the only exception being California. ProMiles.com says a downward trend has continued into this week. They had the Wednesday average at $3.84 a gallon, down 3 cents from last week, with prices declining in all 10 regions. Daimler is recalling a few hundred Freightliner e-Cascadia trucks over a problem with the electronic stability control. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration says the issue can lead to insufficient braking force when activated. About 330 e-Cascadias are affected. Owner notification letters will go out near the end of August. It's been a solid week on the spot market, at least according to data from DAT. Here's Robert Rouse.
Van and reefer rates were up last week, and flatbed loads were paid right about the same. The national average spot van rate increased 4 cents to $2.15 a mile. The average van load-to-truck ratio climbed a full point to 3.5, meaning there are 3.5 loads to every truck posted on the network. But the big story was reefer freight. The reefer load-to-truck ratio was 5.5 last week, which is still really low compared to other years, but it's a full 2 points higher than the average over the last 2 months. So that reefer load-to-truck ratio has been kind of stuck at 3.5 range at a time when produce season should be driving the demand higher. So a good uptick is definitely something that reefer carriers should appreciate a little bit.
For a full account of current spot market conditions, stay tuned. We'll hear more from Rouse in just a bit. A new law in Michigan makes it illegal to hold an electronic device while driving. That goes for any vehicle on the road, including commercial trucks. The law is meant to cut down on distracted driving and the crashes they cause. Michigan follows in the footsteps of neighboring Ohio, which put a similar law into effect in April. Since then, the state says it's seen a 9% drop in distracted driving, preventing more than 500 crashes. Fuel haulers in Colorado are getting a temporary pass on hours of service regulations. The Colorado State Patrol has issued a temporary waiver that runs through July 15th. It applies to commercial drivers transporting gasoline, diesel, and aviation fuels. Authorities say the move was made to ensure timely and consistent deliveries throughout the state. A week-long CVSA safety enforcement blitz gets started this weekend. The Commercial Vehicle Safety Alliance's Operation Safe Driver Week campaign runs from Sunday through Saturday throughout the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. Law enforcement will be on the lookout for dangerous driving among all road users. That includes things like improper lane changes and using a handheld device. But the main focus will be on a troubling trend, says Jake Elaverta, CVSA's Director of Enforcement Programs.
The focus for this year is pretty much been the same as the previous 2 years, is really speed. Coming out of COVID, and actually even during COVID, we were experiencing the fact that highway speeds are up, and it's impacting people, not understanding the speed differential, not being aware of their approaches, overtaking vehicles, and just the fact that the speeds are so high.
During last year's Operation Safe Driver Week, law enforcement in Canada and the U.S. pulled over more than 35,000 vehicles and issued more than 26,000 warnings and citations. And finally, the American Truck Historical Society has named the inductees for its 2023 American Trucking and Industry Leader Hall of Fame class. The list includes Ted Rogers, the first president of American Trucking Associations, Harry Kent and Edgar Worth, the founders of Kenworth, Frank Sieberling, the founder of the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company, and Al and Don Schneider, founders of Schneider National. An induction ceremony is scheduled for October 25th at the American Truck Historical Society headquarters in Kansas City, Missouri. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. Congratulations to Brian McIntyre of Jackson Center, Pennsylvania. He's received the OOIDA Safe Driving Award for 25 years of safe, accident-free driving. That's the equivalent of a car driver going 188 years without causing a single accident. The OOIDA Safe Driving Award program is sponsored by Shell Rotella. Next, Scott Thompson talks with OOIDA Life member Dave Sweetman about an honor that came with a NASCAR weekend, and Ashley Blackford talks truck insurance with Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby. We'll be back in a moment. I'm Mark Reddig, and this is Landline Now.
You trust PrePass for more bypasses? Now let PrePass help with tolls. PrePass toll service means lower cost, one invoice for all tolls, and fewer violations. Created by truckers for truckers. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Attention all truckers, Dean Michael, the tax doctor here. I want to talk to you about those dreaded tax problems. I know you want to keep on trucking and not even think about them, but let's face it, they're not going away all on their own. You need professional help. I've been helping truckers put their tax problems in the rearview mirror for years. I can help you too. Call me now for a free consultation at 888-557-4020 or go to mytaxhelpmd.com. It's like I always say, keep your eyes on the road, I'll keep mine on the IRS. 888-557-4020.
Welcome back to the show. Our next guest had quite the experience recently after winning a Driver of the Year award for the company he's leased onto. But that was just the start. The award winner is OOIDA Life member Dave Sweetman, and he joins us on the line now. Dave, where are you calling from?
I am in Appleton, Wisconsin.
There you go. Well, thanks for being on the show. I know you're busy out there doing your regular work, so we appreciate talking to you here. And first off, congrats on winning Driver of the Year for Bennett Truck Transport. You're on quite a streak there, Dave. You've also won the 2022 Pilot Flying J Road Warrior Award as well. Which award are you eyeing next?
I actually don't go for awards. It just kind of somebody throws it at me. I believe it or not, I'm pretty low profile. I do my job, try to make my company money, make myself a couple of dollars, and try to do it all safely. And I got picked for one of Bennett's Driver of the Year awards for my division. So I'm very, very fortunate. I'm very, very lucky. And it's almost 52 years of playing with big trucks. Bouncing around the country. I am very honored, very flattered to be noticed and to certainly be rewarded by Bennett. It's very, very humbling.
Yeah, they're throwing the awards at you and you're ducking and picking them up, I guess, here. Some companies obviously hand out bonuses or plaques or what have you. Bennett, I believe, did at least one of those things, but also set you up with an experience, right? Can you talk a little bit about what you got here for this Driver of the Year award?
Well, I got a phone call from one of the ladies in corporate and asked if it was a good time to talk, and it was. It caught me at the right moment, and said that I needed to be in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and I could bring a guest, so I brought my most wonderful friend and best friend in the world, Karen, and we went to Winston-Salem. They put us up at a very nice Hilton. The next morning after breakfast, they rounded us up and took us to Richard Childress Racing, RCR, which is basically he was the partner for Dale Earnhardt, still builds championship race cars. We went to their museum for a tour of the museum and the Driver of the Year award presentation. And there are several divisions at Bennett, so I represented my division, which is Power Only Bennett Drive-Away, BDA, and truck transport. So very fortunate there. And then there was the heavy haul division, and then there was the AA&E division. They had a Driver of the Year for artillery, ammunition, explosives, that sort of thing. So they really spoiled us rotten, pretty much, with a great tour of the museum. And, of course, Bennett sponsors several NASCAR race cars. And the feature for us for the day was Austin Hill, number 21. They had a great catered lunch for us. Mr. Childress himself came and presented the awards. Had a great visit there, and of course, my division boss gave a nice little speech, very, very flattering. Then we did a tour of the museum. Then they gave us a private tour of the engine and chassis and full race car building facility, which nobody gets to see. That's totally private. I've always been kind of a race car nut on a lot of different levels. And my previous gig before this, I was doing Ferrari races and, Formula One races for Ferrari, say at Austin, Texas, at Circuit of Americas, and a lot of the Ferrari Challenge races. So usually I was working my tail off trying to keep up with all that. This time I was the VIP guest, as was Karen. And they really spoiled us rotten. We had a great dinner that night, just fabulous. The next morning, we took a ride up to the Childress Winery, got a tour there, and then about noontime, we got chauffeured up to Martinsville Speedway in Virginia, and we had VIP box seats in one of the sky boxes over turns 1 and 2 at Martinsville. Great thing there. And of course, that was catered, and we were spoiled rotten there too. In addition, I had VIP access badges, and they escorted several of us down to the pit and paddock area and toured and met everybody. And we also did a meet and greet with Austin Hill, number 21 driver. And, of course, they gave us all the great trinkets and swag and T-shirts and, toy race cars and number 21 Bennett flags and some really great trinkets and everything from the races. So that was great fun. Austin Hill, true gentleman, signed Karen's T-shirt on the back. And really had a great adventure. Got to watch the races. They gave us headphones with the company race car channel on there, so I was up on top of what looked like giant toolboxes with a canopy on top of it, and we watched the race from there with the headsets on. Of course, without a headset, the decibels are about 120,000
right,
deafening dBs. Great fun watching the races there. Wound up going back up to the skybox for the tail end of the race, and great fun. And I mean, it obviously it cost Bennett a good bit of money to put all this together for us.
Yeah.
But in almost 52 years of playing with trucks, I have never felt more appreciated and valued as a driver and as an owner-operator than what they make me feel here. I mean, this is no small adventure,
right.
And to be able to spend time with the great folks from Bennett and also meeting Austin Hill and all the support crew from the race teams and everything. Very, very extraordinary weekend.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you that, and you kind of touched on it there. I mean, you've been at this a while. You mentioned, I think, 52 years.
Yes.
So you've been around the block a time or two, and you've won an award or two during that time. And like I said at the top, a lot of companies obviously give thanks to their drivers for safe driving, for tenure, for everything, right? It's usually, a bonus check, maybe a plaque, an award, or something like that. This is, you explained it all there. This is like the full stop. And for someone like you who is a race car fan, you must have been on cloud nine. But you weren't alone. This wasn't just for you, right? This is for a lot of others there in the company that have done this. Have you had a company do this kind of thing for you or for others before?
Never.
Yeah, it's something else.
Never. This was a first for me, certainly. And I mean, to be picked as a driver of the year for my division out of many drivers, and I do have to say, as good as I am at what I do, and I'm patting myself on the back to a degree, but truthfully, I'm only as good as they allow me to be. In other words, I can't be high in mileage and revenue and all that unless I have a crackerjack dispatch operations team. And I don't call them dispatchers because really they're better than that. I have a team of 5 operations people for my division that are just top shelf. I mean, they pre-plan. They know what I'm doing at least 1, 2, sometimes 3 trips in advance. So, if I pick up today, you're going to deliver here on such and such a date. From there, go there, pick up this. And it's, a great leapfrog for me. And in my opinion, in all the years I've been doing this is the way trucking ought to be. I mean, people that care about keeping the trucks rolling and making money, but also treat you as a partner, not just somebody that's a number on the phone. For me, that's just extraordinary. The award itself, they gave me a very nice jacket embroidered with my name and company logo and driver of the year, and that looked very nice. And gave me a beautiful cut glass trophy, driver of the year trophy. And there was also a very healthy check to go along with that too.
That doesn't hurt.
So thank you for that. I'll be happy to take your money. Thank you.
Yeah.
So it really was an extraordinary experience the way they put it all together was just quite incredible. I mean, it's really very much a treat.
Well, that's kind of my takeaway, too. And you wrote up your experience for the July issue of Landline Magazine, and I encourage everybody to check it out when it does come out, because the thing that I took away from it is something that you touched on there, is that Bennett is obviously treating you well. You've been at this for a long time, and we know that the more experienced a driver is, the safer they are, which has benefits on down the line. And that really stands out to me. I know not every company is going to be able to send their employees off, to a NASCAR experience or, spa treatment or whatever it may be. But it really does speak volumes, to treating your drivers and treating your employees well translates into a better company model, safer drivers, and just, a better experience for everybody.
Correct. I mean, the company motto basically has been probably forever, safety is priority one. And even though that may sound canned and a little bit corny, they take it very seriously. We do monthly safety meetings on what they do as an all call, either Facebook or a phone call to you. You can watch it live on Facebook, and no, you don't do that going down the road. They are very good about safety meetings and pointing out what even, long-term seasoned drivers either know or should know or need a reminder so that they know. Sometimes just the obvious thing, the Smith system, the following distances, tailgating, weaving in and out, and all that. And personally, I have over 5.5 million miles without a scratch. I've never had a damage or a boo-boo or a claim. And I take that very seriously. They also, the nice folks at Bennett, also use that as part of their, I would say, critique on the driver award program. In other words, I've been driver of the month twice, and very humbled. Thank you very much. The driver of the year thing, that was all part of the same criteria. Not just the number of miles, but how you do your job safely, how you interact with customers on both ends, how you deal with shippers, operations, dispatch. It all takes into a big accounting. I've always prided myself on trying to make not just the company and myself money, but when I show up at a customer, I want to be presentable as a driver, have clean, neat equipment, and just, take that part of the job very seriously.
Yeah.
So that when they go to book the next shipment, they go, hey, well, Dave did this for us the last time. Even if I'm not going to do it, they came away with a good vision of how Bennett works. And it was the same when I worked for Horseless Carriage, when I worked the meat and produce industry. I always took a lot of pride in what I did.
Yeah, putting the professional in professional truck driver. That's what it's all about there. Hey, Dave, it's always good talking to you. We've got to cut it off there, but do let us know when you win that next award. All right?
I will do that, and can't wait to see you all the next time I breeze through your neighborhood in Missouri. Thanks very much for having me, and thanks for having me on page 84 every month.
Absolutely. Our thanks to Dave Sweetman. You can read up on his NASCAR experience in the July issue of Landline Magazine. And Landline Now is back right after this.
Firestone tires are for more of everything. More miles for every tire dollar, and more confidence in your fleet. At Firestone, we help fleets save with dependable value. Find your local Firestone dealer today at firestonetire.com/dealer.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2023 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Landline Now, welcome back. Like tires, fuel, and an engine, insurance is one of those things you just have to have for your truck. But not all insurance is created equal. Ashley Blackford is here with the experts from OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department to answer some questions.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Trina, Skywalker, and Trista Roby with OOIDA's Insurance Department. How are you doing today, ladies?
Super.
Hi, Ashley. Doing great. How are you?
I am wonderful.
Good.
Today we are talking about secondary liability. First off, can you explain to me the difference between primary liability versus secondary liability?
So primary liability is going to be the liability required by FMCSA to activate your authority. So it's a federal requirement. It's the required liability coverage. Secondary liability is a liability for when you lease onto one of those motor carriers, and they're the ones that are going to require that secondary liability, not FMCSA. So that would be mandated by your motor carrier. And a lot of times you're going to hear bobtail, non-trucking, unladen. Those are all secondary liability coverages.
And we call them secondary because they come second to the primary. So if you don't have a primary liability in place, either because you have your own authority or because you're leased onto someone with their authority, there's nothing for the other liability to come second to. So if you have a bobtail policy, but there's no primary liability in place on your equipment, that is generally going to be no good.
Going to be a null and void policy.
What kind of calls do you often get when it comes to people wondering about secondary liability?
I think one of the biggest ones is about tagging. So they'll have bobtail coverage and call us and say, I need proof of coverage to tag my equipment. And most of your DMVs are going to require primary liability. And I say most because you will occasionally get somebody that gets the insurance card that says liability and has your name on it. So they'll accept that liability coverage. But really, it goes back to what Trina said, the primary liability. That secondary liability is not even an active policy if you don't have primary liability in place. So they should be requiring the primary coverage.
They should be. When we do get those calls, we do have the conversation because they'll say, well, I've used this before. I've gotten it before with this. And so we have to make sure to tell them. Sometimes when you go to the DMV, you might interact with an employee there that would accept the card that says liability. But there's a chance, too, that you're going to be interacting with someone who is maybe a little more experienced and knows that it has to be the primary. So it's not to say no one's ever gotten a tag or a plate with the wrong coverage. But generally speaking, it's our responsibility to say, here's what you might need too. Like Trista was saying, you have to have the primary. So usually what they need to have is a copy of their lease agreement and a cab card or something from the motor carrier, because when the insurance isn't in your name, it's hard to tag with it. And the contract with the motor carrier is what kind of ties that together. So you can get your own plate. Sometimes when you lease on, the motor carrier gets the plate for you. But if you're trying to get your own, you have to have the lease and their proof of coverage.
And another common question that we'll get is somebody asking for that secondary liability coverage. They'll say, I need non-trucking liability for when I'm bobtailing. It's just, you just really need to be aware of the fact that most companies, those are two different coverages. Non-trucking covers, something a little bit different than bobtail will cover. But, be careful about what you're asking for. You really need to ask for the coverage that's in your lease agreement.
Well, and different agents, I think, are going to have a different definition for each coverage. And so, we've had people call us and say, well, I need a bobtail coverage, because that's what the lease says. But then we still have to, if they own their own trailer, for us, I'm not saying with every insurance company, but for us, the bobtail doesn't cover you when you're pulling an empty trailer. So we have to kind of go through each of the coverages we offer, explain how they cover, make sure it's acceptable with the motor carrier, because maybe it is worded a little differently than what the lease says. And so that's a call we get quite a bit too, is kind of drilling down on those coverages to see what's actually needed.
So if someone's in this situation, what kind of questions would you recommend they ask their motor carrier or look for in their lease agreement to know what kind of coverage they need?
Well, there's always like an insurance section, and that's where the and that's in the lease agreement. And the motor carrier says, okay, we're providing primary liability, we're providing cargo. You have to carry your own. Usually it says non-trucking liability or bobtail. That's really what you're looking for. But again, the definition that the motor carrier has in their head when they're drafting up that lease agreement versus the definition that the insurance company has is one of the conversations that we need to have with everyone just to make sure they're properly insured.
And yeah, sometimes that lease agreement will say bobtail coverage for when you're not attached or when you're not under dispatch, which could be when you're attached to an empty trailer as well.
Right.
So really that's one of the questions that we're going to ask. What does the lease agreement require? What's the definition behind that non-trucking liability? And possibly even just that have you had a conversation with your motor carrier, to see exactly what they're looking for as well.
And most importantly for us, have you signed the lease? I think there's a lot of agencies out there that don't inquire about that because they don't really care.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying they're not caring people, but it's just not part of their protocol to check on that. With us, it's huge because signing that lease agreement is what means you have the primary liability in place because they're saying in their insurance section that that's what's required or that's what they're providing for you. And so if you haven't signed the lease, generally we're not going to let you start a bobtail or non-trucking policy because it's a secondary policy and there's nothing primary. There's nothing for it to come second to. So reading the lease, signing the lease are crucial to obtaining this coverage.
Yeah, so we would hate for you to call in, get the coverage that you need, and then bobtail to the motor carrier and have an accident occur and find out that you don't have bobtail coverage because your lease agreement wasn't signed. So those are going to be a lot of questions that you should be prepared for when calling all truck insurance companies.
Ideally.
Yeah.
And will the motor carrier, they won't always maybe be clear about that?
Well, really what it's dependent on is when they're allowing you to sign the lease.
Oh, okay.
Some of them require you to be in person.
They want to inspect your equipment. And, they've got standards, too, which makes sense.
Yeah. Some of them will allow you to sign it via email or something along those lines, which, then you wouldn't be put in a situation like that.
But you have to think of that, trip there.
Definitely.
Ideally, you wouldn't get in an accident, but worst case scenario.
Right. I'm sure it's happened.
And sometimes what we'll see happen is somebody not break their old lease until their new lease is signed. And that would probably be your most ideal situation, regardless of the insurance company you're dealing with.
Do people ever find themselves in a situation where they have double coverage? And if so, how would one avoid that?
We have seen that before because sometimes the motor carrier will offer to provide the bobtail for you. And again, that's going to be in the insurance section of the lease agreement. And that's something you need to be very, very careful on. They'll sometimes provide the physical damage and bobtail and just take the payment out of your settlement. And I've had calls where someone has purchased that same coverage with us, and then a few months down the road, they find out that they've got it through us and through the motor carrier because they didn't realize they were being put on some sort of a fleet policy or something like that. And so it is very important to check on that. You want to do your comparison as well if they do offer to provide the coverage for you. What kind of coverage is it? Does it cover as much as a policy you could buy on your own?
Do you have any control over that policy?
Right.
If you change trucks, are they going to change that truck on your policy on that secondary policy for you? Or is that something that you also have control over? And that's why it's actually really good to get the coverage on your own. But if it is in your settlement and it's all automatically taken out, there's no reason for you to be getting it on your own and paying for the double coverage.
Right. Well, and there's been red flag situations in the past too, where I've had a caller indicate that they've tried to get further information about their policy from the motor carrier and are unable to get anything. If there's a policy on your equipment, you should be able to obtain that information. You may not be allowed to call that insurance company and make changes or anything like that because you're not the policyholder, but there's no reason why they should withhold that information from you. It's your equipment. It's your investment. If you ask for information on sometimes even payments, what's the premium? What does it cover? That's a huge red flag. If you try to obtain that and the motor carrier is resistant, I would question that because there's no reason you should not be able to see that.
And access it.
Right.
A policy that's in your name on your equipment.
Let's discuss some other coverages that can go with secondary liability, UMU and PIP. Is that what we call it?
Yes, yeah.
Those are
much to Ashley's dismay.
Yes. So they are often abbreviated UIM, which is uninsured and underinsured motorist, and then PIP, which is personal injury protection. Those coverages are typically going to be at a state minimum limit or, what the state might require. Some states don't require PIP coverage, and typically you're not going to be able to purchase it through the insurance carrier if it's not a state mandated coverage.
Right.
How can you know what's mandated in your state?
You should be able to go to a state website and see what their requirements are. Most insurance companies are going to be able to tell you. I mean, even when I call and get a quote on my personal auto, they'll say, we offer or you are required to have X amount, but we also offer higher limits, which not everyone offers higher limits, but even a simple call to your insurance company should be able to answer that question for you.
Yeah, good call. Check with your agent.
Also, I want to make sure we say, too, that for those that have their own authority and their own primary liability, you don't need a secondary. I wanted to interject that because we've had a lot of calls on that, too. We've had a lot of misconceptions where people have carried both, and it's generally a motor carrier requirement. It is not something, again, like Trista said in the beginning, it's not a state requirement. It's not a federal requirement. Well, going back to the tagging, there's a couple of states that are kind of wonky with their like bobtail requirements or non-trucking requirements. But in general, all you have to have is the primary liability if you're on your own.
Yeah, so if you're your own motor carrier, don't have your liability and cargo policy someplace and then have your FISDAM and bobtail coverage elsewhere. I mean, it's fine to have your physical damage elsewhere, but if you have that bobtail, you're paying for a coverage that's never going to do you any good because that'll always pay out under your primary liability, under the numbers on the side of the truck, and they're going to refer back to lease agreements and legalities and there's just no reason to have that second policy.
Yeah, I had a caller one time that was advised by their insurance agent, to have a bobtail policy when he had his own authority. And the easiest way for me to describe it was you're literally throwing your money in the trash. There's absolutely no reason to have the secondary policy when your primary covers you all the time.
All right. Ladies, thank you very much. Very helpful information.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Our thanks to Trina Skywalker and Trista Roby of OOIDA's Truck Insurance Department. If you have any questions about insurance, you can call 816-229-5791. For Landline Now, I'm Ashley Blackford. We'll be back after this.
Forget accuracy, weigh your truck on a CAT scale.
When you weigh on a CAT scale, you get a no excuses guarantee. You can now save time weighing by using your smartphone. Find out more at weightmytruck.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Landline Now. Welcome back. There are a number of critical questions you need to answer in order to run a successful trucking business. Among the most important of those questions are, Where's the freight going to be, and how much is it going to pay? Today, Landline Now senior correspondent Ashley Blackford will bring us answers to both of those important questions with a look at this week's freight markets with the folks from DAT. Here's Ashley now with the report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello once again to Robert Rouse of DAT. How are you doing today, Robert?
I'm doing great, Ashley. Thanks for asking.
Now, the final week of June is one of those bellwether weeks of trucking. It's the last week of the month, the quarter, and the first half of the year. Did we see hopeful signs for freight volumes last week or more of the same?
Yeah, it was a pretty solid week for anyone who hauls freight on the spot market last week. The number of loads on the Members Edge load board were up about 10% week over week, while the number of trucks was down 16%. So more loads and fewer trucks compared to the previous week, which is good for rates. It's pretty typical to see higher load volumes during the last week of June. Shippers are motivated to get goods out of inventory and off their books ahead of the quarter ends. And everyone takes off the 4th of July holiday. So that's where we see a lot of those trucks not available to haul some of that freight. So while volumes were up, the number of loads were still way lower than we've seen in other years during the last week of June. To put that into perspective, there were 1.6 million loads on the network last week. There were 4.6 million loads on the network during the same week in 2021 and 3.2 loads on the network this time in 2022. So we're still not at the same volumes as we would normally expect this time of year, but, was better than the week prior. The other factor to look at is the number of trucks. There were 16% fewer trucks on the Members Edge load board last week. That came in around 350,000 all told. That's the lowest total for the final week of June since 2018. More trucks were either taking the time off or not posting their equipment due to the spot market for one reason or another. But without a doubt, we've seen truckers exit the market. One positive sign for truckers, diesel is down 3 cents this week to a national average of $3.84 a gallon, according to the AAA. That's almost $2 a gallon less than the national average this time last year. So that should be helping as well.
Now, more loads and fewer trucks usually means better spot rates. What happened with rates last week, and what can truckers expect in the weeks ahead? Yeah,
van and reefer rates were up last week, and flatbed loads were paid right about the same. The national average spot van rate increased 4 cents to $2.15 a mile. The average van load to truck ratio climbed a full point to 3.5, meaning there are 3.5 loads to every truck posted on the network. But the big story was reefer freight. The reefer load to truck ratio was 5.5 last week, which is still really low compared to other years, but it's a full 2 points higher than the average over the last 2 months. So that reefer load to truck ratio has been kind of stuck at 3.5 range at a time when produce season should be driving the demand higher. So a good uptick is definitely something that reefer carriers should appreciate a little bit. The average spot reefer load paid about $2.52 a mile. That's up 5 cents week over week, and that's the highest rate since the middle of May. So good news there as well. But as the short-term trend, it's not unusual to see reefer demand increase during the lead up to the 4th of July, especially this year since it was a 4-day weekend for a lot of people. So lots of meat, lots of fresh produce moved from distribution centers to supermarkets and restaurants ahead of that holiday. If you're interested in hauling fresh produce, one of the simplest ways you can take is to look at the latest crop reports from the USDA, and other sources have it as well. That's a great way to understand where all the produce is moving and what regions to be looking at. For instance, looking at the onion market, California growers are now harvesting in the San Joaquin Valley. The California New Mexico seasons will continue through mid-August. And the Northwest storage season will start in early August for those as well. On the East Coast, tomato production is transitioning from Florida up to Virginia and Tennessee. Bell pepper producers are moving from Georgia to North Carolina, where that's getting stronger. But produce haulers are experts at using harvest calendars and crop yield forecasts to know where demand is going to be. They're some of the most resourceful owner-operators that I know.
In today's business environment, one of the top topics every week is double brokering and fraud. Do you have any advice that could help drivers stay safe?
Absolutely. This is a really, really important topic right now. The impacts of fraud are pretty widespread and relate both to a personal and business situations. So, as an owner-operator, even a personal attack can have a major impact on your business and hurt your ability to operate or even try to get funding for any new equipment, things like that. So it's super important to keep both your personal and your business protected from any cyber attacks or any things like that. My first piece of advice for all owner-operators is to make sure that you're using a different password for all of your online accounts. This is super important. I know it's really easy to use the same password for every single account, but that's really not really safe. If you utilize the same password for every account, it makes it much easier for a bad actor to be able to take over all of your accounts. So for example, if they hack your email and that was easy for them to get that password, and then you also use that password on your bank and some other things like that, it'll be much easier for them to go attack all of those different avenues just by getting access to one of your passwords. So definitely want to make sure you're using a different one for each account. When drivers think about passwords, you want to make sure that they are unique enough to make it harder for simple guesses based off of your internet presence. So one of the biggest things that we see is social engineering, where people could ask you, what's your dog? What year did you graduate from high school? Some typical things that a lot of people use in their passwords, and that causes for a lot of avenues for them to attack you. So you want to use something that's fairly unique, maybe a passphrase or something like that, that isn't something that is directly related to something that you might put out there on your online presence. At DAT, we do require passwords to be a minimum of 15 characters with a mix of upper and lowercase letters, numbers, and even special characters. That's just one of the many steps that DAT is taking to help users keep their passwords more secure. We definitely, encourage things like passphrases, things like that, that users will be able to use for that. We're also doing a lot more for this type of area. We'll be adding multi-factor authorization to all DAT accounts coming in 2023 as well. Basically just more and more verification ways. You're seeing multi-factor authentication happening for your bank. That's just another security measure that a lot of companies are taking, and DAT is definitely one of those. So the other second piece of advice that, I understand that most carriers, and even myself, we have to remember lots and lots of passwords and lots of different logins. I have the same problem. I deal with it every single day. And so one of the things that users could do to kind of combat that differently is use a password manager to keep track of all your passwords and making logging easier while keeping your password secure. There's a lot of tools out there that specialize in those types of security measures in order to keep your password safe. That's definitely a pretty good investment for carriers to make.
If our listeners want more information, where can they go for that?
Absolutely. You can get the latest rate information at dat.com/trendlines or look for our weekly market updates on the DAT blog. They're published every Wednesday. And also check out and subscribe to the DAT IQ channel on YouTube, where you can get all the latest forecasting teams' insights on the markets.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Robert.
Thanks, Ashley.
That was Robert Rouse of DAT. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Ashley. That's our program for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife,
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
Chrome, and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers.
We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us! Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.